Before I begin, let me make one note. I had the privilege and honor of reading my father this eulogy just 5 days ago. It was a moving experience that allowed the two of us to celebrate his life together. This is our chance, the Atlanta Jewish community, to continue that celebration. Wow, look at this crowd. What a gathering. I can't help but think that out of everyone here, the one who would most enjoy this immensely large group of members of the community would be my father. To be a truly great person, you must have passion. Tchaikovsky was passionate about his music. The passion that defined George Carlin was his jokes. My father was passionate about human beings. Dad was the very definition of a people person, the lifelong social butterfly, the extrovert who could never get enough. I have a memory of being at synagogue here on Shabbat as a little kid, right back there in the back room, at 2 p.m., pulling at my dad's hand and begging him to take me home. Long after the rest of the rabbis and congregants had left, there stood Dad, still holding court in front of 4 friends. With genuine excitement, Dad called out, "Great sermon! That was the best of Goodman's career!" To Dad, everything was the best. And all with no notes. He is the greatest. What a genius. Dad went on to critique and explicate the best and worst parts of the service, remembering obscure details that went unnoticed by everyone else. Turning his attention to the schnapps table, he proclaimed, "Here, Jack, you need another drink. Scotch or whiskey? Have one more l'chaim. Come on, just one more." Jack had already had just one more 10 minutes before, when Dad promised that l'chaim number 2 would be the last. But it was a foregone conclusion that Jack, just like all of you, could not say no to my father. L'chaim, l'chaim, to Jack's new job at the CDC. In unison, all raised their glasses. L'chaim, 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 to life. Such a simple Hebrew word, and yet so profound. L'chaim was much more than Dad's favorite saying. L'chaim was a human activity, a celebration of the people that he loved. It was a state of being, the climax of his week, a time when distinct individuals joined together to become one. It was all these things and so much more. I will remember fondly the hundreds of times that I joined Dad with drink in hand as we said the immortal phrase, l'chaim. He did not just raise his glass to life. What he meant by saying l'chaim was that life is great. And as his son, this is my l'chaim to the short but overflowing, much too short but incredibly great life that Sam Schatten lived. L'chaim. I might need help. I don't have good genetics with strength. I'll let you work on that. You work on that. Okay, we'll begin. All right. Last May, Dad and I saw Dr. Calton, the heart surgery who performed open heart surgery on Dad 4 times. Dr. Calton looked at the CAT scan and with great hesitancy said, "Your cancer is back again. We can't keep cutting you open every time the sarcoma comes out of hibernation. This is very risky." The doctor went on to say, "I'm not sure that I can go through with it. Jeff, Sam, I am sorry." Calton explained the risks of low platelets, of bleeding, of Dad not making it through surgery. But Dad, as we knew he would, respectfully but with relentless determination, made the case for trudging ahead. The wild cowboy that he was, Dad got back up on his horse and in 20 minutes had convinced Dr. Calton to cut him open a 4th time. Dad joked 2 years back when he was first put under the knife. Calton should not have sewed him back up. A zipper would have made more sense. At the end of our visit, Dad told Calton, "Once more, this is it, just one more." Dr. Calton explained that the cancer was sure to come back. "I know," my dad said, "but before it comes back, I'm getting an artificial heart. We will worry about that when the time arises." I smiled at Dr. Calton, for he too now knew what it means when my father says, "One more time." As soon as we left the office, I called Mom on the cell. "Dad convinced Calton to do it, but it doesn't look so good. Mom, I'm scared." "I'm scared. Hold on. I'll let Dad explain the details." "Janet, great news. I'm going to do just fine. First, the cancer comes out. Afterwards, I'm going to get an artificial heart. Isn't that great?" Dr. Wilmer and Dr. Calton cut Dad open. Once Dad's heart was exposed, Calton decided that continuing the surgery and taking out the cancer was a risk that he could not take. He explained to Wilmer that a full incision down the middle of the heart would mean certain death. Dr. Wilmer replied, "Now you know that Sam would be upset if we just sew him on up without doing something. But let's leave the heart alone and access the cancer through the pulmonary artery." "But that's never been done," Calton pointed out. "I know," Wilmer said, "but Sam would want us to try." Calton agreed, and for the first time in surgical history, a sarcoma was taken out through the pulmonary artery. After finishing, Calton told us, "We couldn't imagine telling Sam that we had given up. When he looks at me with those eyes, I just can't say no." For Dad, there was no dispute as to whether the cup was half full or half empty. A cup dwindled down to 1%, without a hint of uncertainty, would be proclaimed by Dad to not only become full, but to overflow. The eternal optimist, Dad saw no distinction between the contradictory lines, "You will live, Dad," and "If you live, Dad, it will be a miracle." The word "live" was enough to keep him fighting. But his optimism was not at the expense of reason. He was not in denial about his uphill fight against death. He said a couple weeks ago, "By October, I'll either have an artificial heart or I'll be dead." And it is this life, a life of rational optimism, that my father lived. He seamlessly wove together into one worldview both a brain of reason and a heart of faith. The rationalist is all brain. The optimist is all heart. My father was all both. And it was this magic formula that he used to fight as hard against death as any man has on any continent in any generation. My father spent his entire life fighting the odds, as a physician and later as a patient. And what a fighter he was. After 33 and a half months of fighting for his life, here are the box scores, and these are outstanding. 4 rounds of chemotherapy, a 12-inch sarcoma lived in his pulmonary artery, 4 open heart surgeries, 2 cardiac arrests, the recipient of successful CPR, having a blood pressure of 48/37, and living. An $80,000 fight with Blue Cross Blue Shield. He got a senator to force the FDA to approve a drug that he needed, and he caused the entire city of Atlanta to have a shortage of platelets. And a lot of y'all helped out with that, to help out. While under general anesthetics, a radiologist in a spacesuit put a sponge soaked in radiation in his heart, which was many times the lethal dose. He lost and replaced 12 units of blood in a single 4-day period. Dad was poked and prodded, his organs zapped and cut, redirected and tossed out. His body has been taken apart, and unlike Humpty Dumpty, he has been successfully put back together
again and again and again. In the end, my father weathered a mind-boggling 14 hospitalizations. Just a few weeks ago, Dad was nearly dead in the ICU in Houston, Texas. 2 days later, he was back in Atlanta, sang L'chaim at the Cheetah 3 for Scott Hyman's birthday party. In the history of this bizarre sarcoma of the heart, Dad outlived every single patient in the world except for one. And against all odds, it was not the cancer that killed my father, but heart failure. Dad was the composer, conductor, and first violinist in his medical care. His battle for life does not deserve a moment of silence. It warrants a serious round of applause, a standing ovation. L'chaim, to the man who lived by the creed that no price is too high to pay to preserve one's life. L'chaim. It's not nearly over. Okay. L'chaim. Wait, wow. Okay. Dad was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful husband. In 2005, my parents went out to dinner for their 25th wedding anniversary. At the table, they wrote out the 25 most significant blessings in their lives, but they could not stop at 25. They continued on, counting the dozens and dozens of blessings for which life had given them and for which they were so grateful. Dad loved Mom. This was a given. For a husband to love his wife, that's only a small achievement. However, what made their relationship special was that Dad was both in love with Mom, and most importantly, he genuinely liked, valued, and appreciated her. A few weeks back, he explained, "She is a loving, devoted, selfless caregiver. Our souls are intertwined. Recently, when Mom and I were out at dinner, she told me, 'You know, when I married your father, I knew I was marrying a good man, but I had no idea that I was marrying a great man.' In watching my parents, it seemed like such an ideal fit, that Dad was intellectually left-brained and politically right-wing, while Mom was intellectually right-brained and politically left-wing. A script written by Basheret herself, the greatest of yin-yangs brought together into one perfect unit. Dad was an incredible father. As most of you know, I have 3 brothers, 2 of whom have Fragile X, the most common cause of inherited mental retardation. Growing up, we used to spend Sundays at the JCC watching Alan and Todd play in the Special Needs Basketball League. Unlike the regular league, dribbling was optional and out of bounds was merely a suggestion. Parents sat on the bleachers and gossiped, while the 17-year-old coaches spent the game flirting with one another. However, there was one glaring exception to this laissez-faire approach to special needs basketball, and that was, of course, you guessed, my father. "Alan!" he would scream. "Penetrate! Drive to the basket! Layup! Oh, come on, Todd! Stop shooting so far out! What are you thinking? Defense, put your hands up, boys! Oh, Alan, stop shooting like a girl!" During halftime, Dad pulled Alan and Todd aside to go through strategy, pointing out the necessary changes that were needed to win the game. After the gym cleared out, he worked with Alan and Todd on their layups and their mid-range jump shots. Winston Churchill used to take his 2- and 4-year-olds children out on the beach to teach them wartime strategy by playing battles in the sand as if the outcome of the war depended on toddlers. So too with my father. Dad worked with Alan and Todd with the same enthusiasm and interest that he did with Michael and me. The fact that they were special needs was a non-factor. In his characteristically positive and optimistic spirit, Dad embraced the sweetness of having two special needs children. Over the last 10 years, Dad has worked to help make Alan and Todd integral members of the Chabad community, where they have been able to branch out and flourish as individuals. Dad, Alan, and Todd walk to shul together. They pray and celebrate together and collectively eat of the rich fruits that Jewish life produces. In the end, one of Dad's greatest gifts to the family has been this: an endless devotion to the transformation of Alan and Todd from two people defined by their genetics into active and engaged adults who are a vital part of the larger Jewish community. Dad adored the wit and charm of Michael, or Phil, some of you know him. He created a book called Michaelisms, a leather-bound compilation of all the great sayings of my brother. There have been many nights where I have come home to see Dad as the guest of honor of an entertaining storytelling event held by my brother Michael. One of the most interesting father-son exchanges occurred when I was 21 as a result of a fierce game of checkers. After literally 500 tries of beating Dad in checkers, I finally defeated him. He purchased a fine bottle of champagne, and the two of us celebrated, saying one l'chaim after another. And here, deep within this anecdote, is the essence of this special father-son relationship. While I was genuinely excited at my victory, it was Dad who was grinning ear to ear. He was so proud to have reared a son who could defeat him in checkers. With a glass in hand, he said, "Jeff, my son, today is a great day, one of the greatest, l'chaim." While Dad impacted my life in ways that are too numerous to count, one of his greatest gifts was that of wisdom and perspective. When I was 10 years old, I overheard Dad explaining the status of the family finances to Mom, and I realized that the math did not add up. Dad was lying through his teeth. He told Mom that he was giving less than 10% of his income to charity, when really it was 20 or 25%. Once Mom left the room, I asked why he lied about tzedakah. This was when Dad taught me about the thin line between shalom bayit, keeping peace in the house, and lying. He said, "When you are older and have a family, you will be very lucky if the biggest lie is about how much money you give away to charity." It is time that Mom, Alan, Todd, Michael, and I say l'chaim to Sam Schatten, a great father, the family man. L'chaim. Dad loved the Jewish community as passionately as he loved our family. Synagogue president of the Ahavat Achim, Dad captained the ship when AA's smooth seas turned tumultuous. Dad's mission was to maintain the traditional elements of synagogue life. He devoted himself tirelessly to ritual, tefillah, and religious programs. He established Torah study groups at the synagogue, developed the academically charged Goodman Institute, and brought music and concerts back to the AA by putting together the Atlanta Jewish Male Choir. If you are sitting here today, it is certain that you have received numerous calls from Dad to get you to donate money to one cause or another. Dad always said, "Nobody can say no to me, except for my family." Dad would call you for $100 as a one-time gift, and by the end of the conversation, you would find yourself writing a check for $200, only to be called up a year later and then having to contribute $500. And Dad's influence extended beyond the Jewish sphere. Through the nonprofit organization that he started with Wayne Miller, called the Clear Coalition, Governor Sonny Perdue recently signed a bill into law mandating CPR and defibrillating training in all Georgia public schools. Dad's Clear Coalition produced a similar law that has passed the United States House of Representatives and is awaiting to be presented in front of the U.S. Senate. So let us say l'chaim to a true community leader and the world's only upper-middle-class philanthropist. L'chaim. Dad saw everything through a Jewish prism. Being Jewish was as central to his sense of self as being male or being a father. Judaism seeped out of every pore of his body, and one can only imagine that even the strands of his DNA have been both circumcised and bar mitzvahed. A meal was not complete without Dad's words of Torah, which were infused with his own unique interpretation and perspective. During the last few weeks of life, Dad would start the morning prayers at 9 a.m. By the time he reached Birkot HaShachar, he had expended all his energy and would be found plopped over asleep in his chair, resting his head on the jumbled up tefillin that covered his hand. An hour and a half later, he would wake up and slowly meander his way through the Baruch and Shema until sleep overcame him once more. 11 a.m. would turn to noon, and by 4 p.m., he would reach the Amidah. "Sam, don't you want to be in bed?" Mom asked. "No," he slowly uttered. "I'm going to finish davening." Though late afternoon came and went, Dad would not finish the morning prayers. To Dad, the experience and obligation of Jewish ritual was not a means to an end. He did not believe that one should only pray in order to seek God's divine favor. Rather, prayer and ritual observance were ends in and of themselves. To pray, that was the goal. To light candles, to observe yard site, and study Torah and Talmud, these were the aims of Jewish existence. Just last Shabbat, we had Friday night dinner at the hospital. Uncomfortably dying, Dad spent the evening wearing an oxygen mask. When I bent over to give him a kiss, goodnight, he managed to say, "It's a great Shabbat, great Shabbat." "Dad, are you Job?" I recently asked. Yes, I am Job. I have suffered a lot," is a direct quote. "I have suffered a lot, but I have suffered so that I can learn from it. Suffering teaches you to look inward and see if there is anything that you could have done to have caused it. And if there was something you have done wrong, then you must change it. But if you look inward and discover that you are clean, then you say it was an act of God, and you move on and try how to best figure out how to deal with the situation you are in. But to sit around and say, 'Woe is me,' and to blame God, that is going to get you nowhere." Yes, Dad was a religious man, but he was a family man first. I asked him about the distinction between his ritual ideals and the reality of our family. He said, "Oh, if it were up to me, I'd be much more ritually observant. That is, if your mom would let me. But to me, peace in the house, shalom bayit, is more important than my level of observance. Marriage is always about compromise, even on ritual." Here is a recording of my father talking about Jewish identity.
Well, I'm an American Jew, not a Jewish American. I'm a very proud Jew, and I think that the future of Judaism really is you have to have some ritual. And I try to impart this to my children, and I hope they understand whether the belief in God is important. But if you don't pass on ritual to your children, you're not going to have Judaism. You can have the most wonderful humanistic views on life and give to causes, but unless there's a ritual, and the ritual that I treasure the most and most important is a weekly Shabbat meal with lighting candles and having Kiddush and Santa Motzi. We also had a Devar Torah on Birkat Hamazon. But unless you do that every week and pass on children, Judaism will die. And you can love Judaism, you can study Judaism, you can have historical Judaism, you can go to service of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but unless you have some kind of ritual in your life, it's not going to be passed on. And I don't know if I've been successful in passing on to my children, but I've tried my very best. And I think what the modern movements don't emphasize enough is it's not how you feel, but it's what you do. And Judaism is a religion of action, of deed, and not just of giving tzedakah, which is very important, but doing it in a Jewish way. And unfortunately, since the modern movements, to a certain form, don't really realize the importance of ritual, I think they're going to die out. I think they're going to emerge first, and they're going to die out.
That last line may have felt provocative, but that's Dad. L'chaim to my father, a deeply devoted, Jewish, spiritual man. L'chaim. Short, witty anecdotes were central to my father. Anyone who has been at our Shabbat table is aware of his fondness for funny stories. Stories that allow us to marvel at the lighter side of the human experience. Here are a few anecdotes that illustrate the more humorous elements of my father's character. Now, Dad was many things, but even his mother would not call him an athlete. When Dad was in college at Princeton, he joined the rowing team. On day one, he was made coxswain, the oarless strategist who guides the boat and calls out, "Row, row, row." He loved it. However, on day two, the coach said, "Everyone rotate positions. Schatten, pick up an oar. You're rower number 5. Dad jumped into action and promptly quit the team. We are all educated as to the ills of drinking and driving, but few of us are aware of the dangerous hazards of driving while seeking spiritual enlightenment. Dad was behind the wheel, driving down North Side while reading the weekly Parsha out of the Bible when he ran the stop sign and crashed right into the driver's side door of a 73-year-old woman who had not been in a car crash in her entire life. Dad is hoping that in the next edition of the Chumash, Art Scroll will insert a related Dad-inspired warning to all drivers. Dad was a relentless grammarian. Here, his driving was perfect. He constantly corrected Michael for saying Jeff and I, when it should have been Jeff and me, and likewise for ending his sentences with the word et. Dad's biggest pet peeve, however, was when Alan added an S to the end of his words. Alan would say, "How is Michael's?" or "Todd's, where's Todd's?" This drove Dad nuts. Once Alan said, "Heads, Todd's," and Dad snapped, "How many times do I have to tell you not to add an S to your words?" Alan pouted his lips and looked down at the ground. Then, without any hint of irony, said, "Sorries." And Dad cracked up. Once, the 5 of us drove out to South Carolina ahead of Dad, who was going to fly out and meet up with us a couple days later. During the drive, Dad called me on my cell. "Hey, can I speak to Alan?" Speak to Alan? What does he want from him? I wondered. I passed back the phone. Dad had been too embarrassed to ask the rest of us what he inquired of Alan. He told Alan that there was cold soup on the stove and that he did not know how to heat it up. Alan said, "Turn it on, dummy." And so Dad did. A full and complete character has many complications and complexities built in. Dad was an inspiring, brilliant, walking Wikipedia of a man who could not light a stove. But isn't that all of us? So for this one, let us say l'chaims to Dad, a serious yet playful man who could laugh at himself. L'chaim. Dad was a true healer, a top-notch physician, and one of the most respected and sought-after rheumatologists in the Southeast. Thousands of people now live healthy lives because of Dad. I'd like to read from 3 of the hundreds of letters that came in after he closed his practice. "Because of you, I am able to play with my children again and be free of pain. 13 years ago, I came to you sick and scared. You wrapped your arms around me and enfolded me in your care. You are the most inspiring human I have ever met. You not only saved my life, but improved the quality. Knowing you has changed me. You will always be remembered by me forever. L'chaim to a healer, a man who devoted himself tirelessly to the betterment of humankind. L'chaim. Recently, I asked Dad, what do you want to be remembered for? He thought carefully and replied, I want to be remembered as being a kind, compassionate, listening person who cared about human beings and always tried to make people grow in a positive way. To my father, the greatest moment of personal and theological doubt in his life occurred when his own father and mentor, Billy Schatten, died exactly 10 years ago. Dad constantly referred to the sayings and teachings of his father. At the death of Billy Schatten, a prominent seat at my father's metaphorical table was vacated, a seat that was never reoccupied. My own profound feeling of complete loss, a hole in my heart that will never be repaired, will likewise stay with me until the day that I die. Thinking of life without Dad is like going to Thanksgiving dinner, but without your sense of smell. The experience goes on, but it feels different, for it is no longer complete. Life has been changed forever. And so, to this remarkable man who came to the brink of death too many times to count and still inched his way back to health, I say l'chaim. L'chaim to a religious man who still loved a good dirty joke. And to the doctor who cared for patients more than profit, I say l'chaim. L'chaim, l'chaim. L'chaim to a man in full who put family first, the community second, and his own interests third. To a man who could not carry a tune, but who nonetheless never stopped turning the page to sing a new song. L'chaim. L'chaim to a man of music and the arts, who developed his appreciation for aesthetics from his loving mother, Barbara Schatten. L'chaim. To a devoted husband and father of four, who took the word l'chaim to life and changed it to mean life is great. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. To Sam Schatten, a kind, compassionate, listening person who cared about human beings and always tried to make people grow in a positive way. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. Now that I have finished my memories of my father, it will be your turn, because one's life lives in those who live after. Here are 2 minutes from a concert that Dad performed back in 1974 at the very young age of 21. Of the many years that Dad sat behind the keyboard, there are only 2 known recordings. What you are about to hear is from one of them. It is a piano sonata by Mendelssohn. While you listen to this piece, please take one specific memory, a personal image, the sound of his voice, an impression of Sam Schatten which is yours, and allow it to live on in your mind and in your heart.